So today, what we're going to do is we're going to address two very commonly raised questions. Actually, they were raised again this past week. Where to find the NACFA professional standards and frequently asked questions, and answer two of the common questions that are frequently asked. So with that, this is the website, and this is where we have our tools, and some specifically that came up this week that I find are extremely helpful are the business appraisal standards comparison chart, and also the international comparison chart of definitions, which relates to the international glossary of appraisal and valuation terms. And we have a U.S. domestic chart of definitions, which compares the domestic as well as the international. So all of those I find are extremely helpful in my practice, and hope you all get a chance to take a look at them. So we're going to address two of the questions that we frequently hear on the standards board. And the first question is, are standards of value, such as fair market value, treated the same from state to state relative to matrimonial dissolution litigation? And the answer is it depends. A valuation analyst must work with their client and or attorney to identify the state-specific terms, definition, and application of the standard of value. What we're getting at there is when you accept an assignment to provide a valuation for family law purposes, it's very important up front to discuss with the attorneys exactly what the laws are in their state, and ask them to provide any guidance that you need up front as to what may be specific to that particular state for valuation purposes, because it does vary quite a bit from state to state. So we're all familiar with these terms, and recently we've tried to really refine that definition, and with the international glossary of appraisal valuation terms and with the charts that we pulled together for both the domestic and the international comparisons from organization to organization with respect to the glossary, we've tried to really refine those terms. So in the U.S., in terms of fair market value, we're talking about the price expressed in terms of cash equivalents at which property would exchange hands between a hypothetical willing and able buyer and a hypothetical willing and able seller, acting at arm's length in an open and unrestricted market where neither is under compulsion to buy or sell, and both have reasonable knowledge of relevant facts. And we can contrast that to the fair value standard of value, for which there are different definitions depending on the concept and the purposes. Fair value is typically defined or imposed by a third party, for example, by law, by regulation, by contract, or financial reporting standard setting bodies. And the most commonly used term for financial reporting purposes is under the IFRS and US GAAP, which defines fair value as the price that would be received to sell an asset or paid to transfer a liability in an orderly transaction between market participants at the measurement date. In terms of fair value for family law purposes, that can be defined in many different ways. And for that, we frequently go to case law. And the state of New Jersey provides a number of cases that we can look at. We'll talk about that later. In terms of investment value, It's generally defined as the value to a particular investor based on individual investment requirements and expectations. And in Canada, they frequently say the value to the owner. The intrinsic value is the value that an investor considers on the basis of an evaluation or available facts to be the true or real value that will become the market value when other investors reach the same conclusion. And so there's a significant difference between those different standards of value. It's very important to know the differences. So for fair market value, generally, fair market value is accepted in Connecticut, New York, Wisconsin, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Florida, Missouri, Hawaii, South Carolina. And some of those states, not all, but some of those states do not include any personal goodwill because personal goodwill is the property of the individual and not the marital property. So the treatment of personal goodwill varies very significantly from state to state across the country. In terms of fair value, we mentioned that New Jersey is a good example of statutory fair value, and only a few states expressly use fair value as the standard of value to be used in a divorce proceeding. These states typically reference shareholder dissent and oppression cases, which use the fair market value standard. In a divorce, the court evaluating discounts may see the application of discounts as an unfair advantage to the party that will enjoy the benefits of the asset. So there are a number of implications depending on the state and the definition of fair value used for marital dissolution purposes. Investment value is defined as the value to a particular buyer or seller, and it's also known as the value to the holder, meaning the operating spouse. And some of the states that use an investment value or value to the holder concept are Arizona, California, Colorado, Kentucky, Michigan, Montana, Nevada, New Mexico, North Carolina, and Washington State. So this means that two states may use a standard of value term like fair market value in slightly different ways, despite both states adopting the same standard of value for a particular type of litigatory purpose. So it's very careful to have that discussion with the attorney and be sure that you're in agreement. What is the standard of value and how is it applied in marital dissolution cases in that area? And it may make a difference from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. For example, it may be applied slightly differently in San Diego than in Los Angeles versus San Francisco or Napa. So it's very important to understand the specific area and how the courts in that specific area, even in the same state, apply the standard value. An example of this in action would be the state-to-state differences noted in the fair market value with regard to enterprise and personal goodwill. Are they treated as the personal goodwill treated as a marital asset, or is it even distinguished at all? And as we discussed, that varies from state to state. The second question that we wanted to talk about today is also in the area of disputes, and that is, does the litigation reporting exception apply to engagements that are not informal litigation, but are contested in dispute or in some form of alternative dispute resolution? And the answer is yes. that the litigation reporting exemption applies to engagements where a dispute exists. They don't have to be in litigation. They can be in arbitration or mediation or uh, any type of collaborative or other forms of agreed dispute settlement arrangements. According to the VD of the NACFA professional standards, evaluation performed for a matter before a court, an arbitrator, a mediator, or other facilitator, or a matter in governmental or administrative proceeding is exempt from the reporting provisions of these standards. And that's really important to understand, is it's exempt from the reporting provisions of these standards, but you're still required, if you're performing evaluation, to do the work to meet the development standards. And the exemption applies solely to the reporting provisions of these standards.